The first Formula 1 racing game on the Nintendo 64 was F1 Pole Position 64. Developed by Human and published by Ubisoft, it was, for its time at least, a fairly solid racing game which could also have been seen as an extended tech demo to showcase what early experiences studios were starting to be able to put together on the console. Of course, it hardly set the world alight in terms of sales, and as the old saying goes, if you want something done right, you've just got to do it yourself. Ubisoft therefore set about developing their own Formula 1 racing title for the console, despite not having the FIA license, meaning it would be missing out on important details that Formula 1 fans tend to get a kick out of. For those interested, Video System had tied down the FIA down to a multi-million year agreement, which meant that Ubisoft in a way needed to replicate the important gameplay factors that the International Superstar Soccer series had to when they too didn't have the football license to work off. Therefore, the game is packed in 16 made up courses, 22 drivers on screen at the same time, of course none of those are actually real, and the ability to tweak and adjust your car settings, which was pretty much a standard feature of Formula 1 games even back in the old Nigel Mansell Formula 1 days on the Super Nintendo. To appeal to all players, the developer placed both an arcade and simulation mode into the game, and if you've been a viewer for a while now, you'll know just how difficult I think it is for developers to try and satisfy both types of player. The game's best mode, which is by far its career mode, and it's only available from the simulation setting, and this sees you work your way through the championship at different difficulty classes to eventually aim at reaching the World Championship number 1 level. The arcade mode is as the name suggests, and it makes the game much more forgiving in terms of its handling, so for anyone who's more casual with their gameplay, it acts as a good entry point into the game. Let's be honest, you know what to expect from an N64 Formula 1 racing game by now, and so most importantly you'll want to know how it plays. And to be fair, it's much better than expected, but still quite far off from the gold standard which is the Formula 1 World Grand Prix series. Even in arcade mode you'll need to learn how to race properly, and by that I mean you'll have next to no chance of winning by just holding down the accelerator and braking just before a turn. You'll need to study the pack of drivers ahead of you, use offensive and defensive manoeuvres to balance your race position, all whilst carefully taking corners to avoid spinning off and retiring. One thing I really loved about this game is the clearly defined characteristics you'll learn about the other drivers as you progress through a season. Just as is the case in real life, some drivers are excellent aggressive drivers who will put up a great fight to overtake you. Other drivers will see you in their rear mirrors and will make your life a misery when you're trying to overtake them. Especially in the career mode, you'll need to actually spend time in your garage making adjustments to your car depending on your standing position and the race itself that's coming up ahead, and also knowing who your main rivals are. It's not all about getting as much speed as possible, it's about knowing how to handle it, and to do enough to frustrate your opponents at the same time. At times in the game it has some great battles going on, and so the AI gets a positive check from me. The physics engine in the game is also top notch. The cars handle fantastically well, and from what I've read this is due in part to it being a modified version of Ubisoft's PC F1 racing simulation game engine. Now those new to F1 games, you'll probably find the controls are perhaps a little bit sensitive, but that's pretty much the case for F1 cars in general, and so it's something you'll just need to learn to get to grips with. The cars are lightning quick and handle a dream, but it does take a lot of practice even for those who are more accustomed to other Formula 1 racing games on the console. Graphically is where the game gets really interesting, because compared to every other title aside from the World Grand Prix series, this is perhaps the best looking title. The WGP series shades it for me personally, but the frame rate here is just a little bit more rock solid and slightly higher, which gives the game a cleaner look when driving. Naturally, there are times when pile-ups and compact corners, the game does slow down somewhat, but overall I think it gives a great sense of speed when playing this. It's just a shame it didn't make use of the expansion pack, as the models are good, but I would have liked to have seen some more detail in them if I'm perfectly honest. Likewise, the tracks are nicely designed if somewhat uninspired, and it's almost as if they wanted to be as close to the real circuits as possible. Personally, I would have liked to have seen them used a bit more creative flair and license and push the boat out with something a little bit more unique. The game does however feature Monaco as the name suggests, and I think that this is the best N64 depiction of this classic track, and it's also the toughest one in the entire game. Of course, without the licenses they couldn't recreate licensed cars, and so those that are here could have done with some more work also to make them a little bit more exciting. Now to the average Joe, they probably can't even tell the difference between generic models and the real cars, but given that Formula 1 games tend to sell primarily to F1 fans, those of you that are fans will be able to tell from a mile off. It also would have been nice to have seen support for 4 players, but you are just limited to 2 in this game, which I believe was decided upon to keep a sensible frame rate, which is also why other cars are removed from the track when you're racing. It is however nice to see that they allow both a vertical and horizontal split screen option. The game's audio is pretty much forgettable. Generic music fills the menus and the races themselves have no music, which I personally prefer for a more serious racing experience. You're instead left with the engine noises, which are good quality, but at times they do sound more like Formula E cars than F1 beasts. There's also no commentary when racing, but if you wanted that you'd surely be playing the Formula 1 series on PlayStation with the excellent Murray Walker donning his best one-liners. Just giving the audio a thumbs up from me is the fact that this is an excellent game to play with headphones in. There are multiple sound point sources throughout the tracks in the game, and if you have a good hearing and a good set of headphones, you can actually hear cars' engines when they're about to overtake you or if they're approaching you, and it does come in handy when you're racing to basically manage things like defense and offense. And of course you haven't got to keep checking the rear mirror because you can actually hear them around you. It sounds like a small detail, but one I do think that fans will instantly enjoy. Overall, Monaco Grand Prix is a surprisingly solid F1 racing title. I still much prefer the WGP series, which is packed with more features and had the official licenses to boot to make any fan drool over. But in the same way it offers something a little bit different, and the arcade mode is a welcome addition for any new player getting into Formula 1 racing games. I just feel that the key audience for this type of game will have overlooked it. Thankfully, it's always a cheap title to pick up, and so it's just about worthy of getting in anyone's collection, that is of course after you've bought both WGP titles. And so for today's topic of conversation, let's talk about licenses. I wouldn't say that I'm a license obsessive person, after all I'd much rather play ISS over FIFA any day, but I think that there are certain games where a license can really enhance the overall experience of the game. And so what are your thoughts? Also let me know any specific genres or games which you feel greatly benefit from being officially licensed. As always, sound off in the comments section down below, and until next time.